Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside and the Hillside Club. It's my pleasure to serve as first vice president. My name is Arlene Baxter. I'm joined here in an empty club with our president, Jim Fisher, in the green room, our amazing manager, Araceli, here, assisted by Bella, the Berkeley Boston, and our speaker, Carol Bier. This Fireside series is a long-standing tradition of talks here at the club. For over 100 years, we've welcomed speakers from among our members, others in the community, to give wonderful content to our members and within Berkeley. Tonight's a special night. This is being filmed on June 1st, 2020, a year that we shall not soon forget. In the midst of a lot of sadness, and especially tonight, a lot of anger, we are very fortunate to be here and sharing in beautiful architecture and be hearing a talk about art and architecture, things that have soothed the human soul for centuries. We're in a beautiful building that was built in 1924 by John White after our original clubhouse designed by Bernard Maybeck was destroyed in the 1923 fire. So this series is part of a long-standing tradition, and I'm so glad to welcome you here tonight. This is the first time, however, that we are presenting to a vacant hall and taking advantage of technology and presenting by Zoom. It will not be the last, however, and I invite you to return in the month on Monday, July 6th at 7 p.m. when we will be hosting a community event with the Ecology Center. I will be interviewing the director, Martin Bork, on the topic of plastics and the pandemic, how we can curb the increased use. So come back then. It's now my pleasure to welcome our speaker this evening, Carol Bier, one of our club members. She is a research scholar in Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, a scholar on Islamic art, also very active in research on textiles, where I first met Carol, also an active gardener, and it's a pleasure to welcome to our club, Carol Bier.
Thank you, Arlene. It's a pleasure to be here under these most unusual circumstances. And I welcome you all. I'm sorry that I can't see you. I hope that you can see me. I'm going to endeavor to share my screen and begin talking about symmetry and Islamic aesthetics. While Jim is setting up our backup PowerPoint, let me talk a little bit about what I'm going to discuss. Just before COVID-19 struck or was acknowledged as having come to the United States, I was in India and traveling there for 3 weeks in February and early March. And when I came back, I went immediately into self-quarantine for 2 weeks. And before that 2 weeks was over, the 6 counties of Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area were asked to shelter in place. And I've been sheltering in place ever since. Today is the first day that I have actually worked in the context with individuals less than 6 feet apart from me, and all of us wearing masks here in the Hillside Club. One of the aspects of what I think is so necessary at unsettling times like these is the search for beauty and the effort to locate beauty where we can find it. Arlene mentioned 2 aspects that actually bracket my talk. One is that symmetry in Islamic aesthetics is very precisely about beauty, and my hope is that in a short period of time to introduce you to aspects of Islamic aesthetics that give us an understanding of beauty in different contexts and different times. And then the second bracket at the end is the fortune with which we are here in Berkeley with the Hillside Club as such a beautiful monument of the arts and crafts period, designed originally by Bernard Maybeck, burned down in the 1923 fire, and then rebuilt in 1924. And it is such a pleasure now and in the past, and hopefully in the future, to be in this great hall, which is one of the most beautiful interior spaces in all of Berkeley, and to have a native plant garden out front facing the street. And between those two brackets, I hope that we'll have an opportunity to look at the Taj Mahal in Agra, India, the Alhambra in Granada, Spain, in the real Sierra Nevada, after which ours were named. And there, I think we have the first slide. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Araceli. I think we can begin. Symmetry and Islamic aesthetics. Take a look at the image of the Taj Mahal on the screen and think about what aspects of symmetry you are familiar with. If we look in the mirror, we see our face. Our face is reflected in the mirror, and our face has a vertical axis of symmetry. That is the most basic bilateral symmetry with which we are familiar, but I'd like to draw your attention in looking at the Taj Mahal that we have not only a vertical axis of symmetry in which everything on the right side of the screen is reflected on the left side of the screen, but also a horizontal axis in which the Taj Mahal itself is reflected in the reflecting pool and water. So we see the lines of the khiyabun, the alleys on each side of the qanat, the water channel, reflected, and the three-dimensional building of the Taj Mahal with its minarets and platform and domes and arches and vaults reflected symmetrically as well. Symmetry itself can be defined as a correspondence of points where each point, in this instance on the right side of the screen, finds its corresponding point on the left side of the screen. And similarity of measure is another way of relating to it. Linguistically, symmetry. But when we look at the symmetry in the Taj Mahal, we can also put it into its physical context, where not only is visual aspects of aesthetic operative, but sound, movement, light, water, fragrance. I was struck on my visit to see the flowers that are planted in the beds today reflected in the clothing worn by the people today. And the vast majority of tourists who visit the Taj Mahal are Indian tourists, that is from the Republic of India. So internal tourism is quite by far the largest. India, incidentally, as you probably realize, is in lockdown right now, and I have correspondence with many colleagues there who are experiencing very much what we are experiencing here in terms of sheltering in place, but theirs is a more stringent lockdown. Going into a little bit further detail, there's not enough time to do as much as I would like with you today. But to look at the arches, the iwans, the vaults, the lines of calligraphy, and the reflection, here we see a three-dimensional example of symmetry where one half of the vault and arch is reflected in the other half of the vault and arch. But where we see the absence of symmetry is very important. And that is in the calligraphy. Although Arabic is not the language of the vernacular in India, it's not the spoken language, it is the language of Islam internationally. And the inscriptions at the Taj Mahal are all in Arabic. Stark contrast between the black Arabic writing and the white marble of the Taj Mahal itself. And the script presents a sequence of surahs, chapters from the Quran, that relate to the here and the hereafter. It's a monument that was built in the middle of the 17th century by Shah Jahan, emperor of the Mughal Empire at the time, to commemorate the death of his wife, nicknamed Mumtaz Mahal, hence Taj Mahal, crown of her nickname, Mumtaz Mahal. And the scripture gives meaning to the monument itself in the context of it being a commemorative memorial monument. At the base of each of the iwans on the exterior of the Taj Mahal, the building, are panels showing flowers that also show symmetrical structures in terms of reflection. That is, the right side is equal to the left side, but it's an approximation. And that approximation is not only an aspect of Islamic art and architecture and a principle of aesthetics, but in this particular instance, showing the flowers with a naturalistic hill beneath them, and the leaves moving in different directions, the flowers moving in different directions. Aspects of symmetry breaking where the symmetry is just a little bit broken, and yet the eye can reconstruct it and see it as symmetrical. That same principle is evident not only in carved marble, as we saw at the base of the Iwan at the Taj Mahal, but also in carpets, textiles, woven textiles, and other media produced in the 17th century. Here, a carpet we think made in the carpet workshops of Lahore. A summary of the principles of what we've seen in the aesthetics of the Taj Mahal include the monumentality of the building, the axial vistas, the vertical axis as well as the horizontal axis, reflecting the reflection of the building in the reflecting pool. But there's also balance and proportion, repetition, the water channels themselves, the garden, which is based on the Persian model of the charbagh, divided into 4 sections, 4 times. The flower beds, which introduce color, fragrance, seasonality, and movement. And then there's the quality of materials, the quality of craftsmanship, the cultural syntheses of Arab, Persian, Turkish, Hindustani, Indian, and the inscriptions in Arabic representing the Quran, and historical, giving the names and dates of architects, engineers, and calligraphers. There are also aesthetic principles related to ambiguities of interior and exterior, physicality, reflection, solid, void, projection, recess, which we'll see in just a moment, and systems of contrast also, including light and shade, dark and light, as we saw with the calligraphy against the black calligraphy against the marble. Here we see one of the other buildings within the complex of the Taj Mahal at the gate structure, and again, 3-dimensional as well as 2-dimensional symmetry and repetition. Here, the use of arches and columns rather than walls and vaults, and the use of red sandstone rather than white marble. Only the Taj Mahal itself within the complex is white marble. The other structures are red sandstone with white marble inlay. So that detail of the gate structure gives us an insight into dualities, not dichotomies, because it's both and, of finite and infinite, light and dark, interior, exterior, solid, void, projection, recess, inside, outside, interiority, exteriority, absent presence, and seen and unseen. We move now to the far west of the Islamic world, the Maghreb, the place of the setting sun. Spain. Spain and North Africa comprise the Maghreb. The Alhambra is a much earlier building than the Taj Mahal, begun in the 11th century with some archaeological ruins that have been excavated. But then the main part of the construction was 13th and 14th century under the Nasrid rulers. The dominant feature we see here, set against the Sierra Nevada, the real Sierra Nevada, is the Renaissance Palace of Charles V, which incidentally both destroyed parts of the Alhambra, but also led to the preservation of it in the 16th century. The differences between the Alhambra and the Taj Mahal couldn't be bigger, to the extent that one is highly defended and in a defensible position. The other, the Taj Mahal, is in a river valley. One served the purpose of a palace, highly defended, the other a commemorative tomb structure with memorializing functions. But they share certain similarities, not the least of which I hope you see here, the use of evergreen plantings in the landscape, and in particular cypresses, but also the extensive gardens. However, the gardens of the two buildings, as we will see from a plan coming up, are quite in contrast to one another. And we have for the Alhambra aspects of inscriptions that give us insight into the meaning of the gardens and the meaning of the architecture. I am the garden. I is the building itself, spoken in the first person, appearing every morning with adorned beauty. Contemplate my beauty, and you will be penetrated with understanding. I excel through the generosity of my Lord, the Imam Muhammad, the Nasrid, for all who come and go. How excellent is your beautiful building, for it certainly surpasses all others by the decree of the stars. So we see here through the inscription and the presence of poetry in the Alhambra, an articulation of the intended meaning of the aesthetics of the monument. And here we see the contrast of the plans of the two buildings, the Taj Mahal on the right, the Alhambra on the left, demonstrating other aspects of similarity and dissimilarity. Namely, the Taj Mahal is one unified construction dating from one period, one vision, and it's building under one patron. Whereas the Alhambra represents an agglutinative sequence of incremental building under successive rulers. Nonetheless, each of the elements in the Alhambra comprises in its planning the elements of symmetry that we've seen in the Taj Mahal that are so prominent in the architecture and the layout of the gardens. Another contrast is that the Alhambra, the interior areas that are ornamented, are white stucco rather than white marble. But we have the same setup of ambiguities of projection and recess, repetition, interiority, exteriority, and solid and void. A different approach to the division of architectural features called muqarnas. Here looking up into one of the most incredibly complex domes in the world, with the transition from a square base to an octagonal section of transition to 16 to 24, and then I've not gotten farther than that, but we can see the amazing use of muqarnas set within the Alhambra itself. And the similar combination of calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, geometric pattern, and floral ornament. The color here is not inlaid stone, semi-precious stones as we saw at the Taj Mahal, but rather ceramic pieces fitted together. I'm going to go through the next section more quickly than I would like, and it may leave some of you wishing for more. Others may want to avoid it entirely, but just quickly an introduction to other aspects of symmetry. The translation is the repetition, as we've seen. Reflection, we examine, right side equals left side. Glide reflection is either a displaced translation or a displaced reflection, and then rotation around a point. If these are arranged in a linear, one-dimensional manner, the only possibility for one design, although the concept is an infinite possibility of designs, are 7 linear patterns. And I should say these all come from my website on symmetry and pattern that is hosted by the Math Forum. I can email that to any of you. If we arrange those lines in a full 2-dimensional pattern with extension by length and width, the number of possibilities of translation, reflection, rotation, and glide reflection is limited to the 17 systems, groups of plane symmetry. And each of these systems fits into a grid of either rectangles or regular polygons. You can see that that can itself take an hour or a week or a semester. But I'd like to introduce you to 2 gentlemen who studied the Alhambra in depth and presented it to the West, but presented it in a way that has lost its cultural significance within its original cultural context. Owen Jones was a Welsh-born English architect who studied the Alhambra and presented early chromolithographs of extraordinary detail and documentation that subsequently influenced extraordinarily the architecture of Europe and the Western world. But he extracted ornament from its original cultural context and cultural meanings and presented it as a grammar of ornament for use anywhere, anytime in design without reference to cultural origin. The other individual in the 20th century is M.C. Escher, the Dutch graphic artist, who was sketching in the south of France and working with landscapes. And then when he went to Spain, he did sketches of the Alhambra's patterns in his notebooks and switched entirely his interest in art to the tessellations so prevalent in the Alhambra. But he felt that they were lacking an animation. And so he inhabited them with horses and shells and ants and spiders and birds. And the 2 approaches to symmetry and geometry in Islamic art, I think, have informed a misunderstanding of Islamic geometric pattern, A, being devoid of meaning, and B, being repetitive and without having deep cultural significance. But if we look to 2 historical figures from within the Islamic world, we may have a better understanding of original context. The first here is a representation of Nasruddin Attusi, a great scientist, and you can see the patterns on the rug beneath his group at the observatory and the tile work on the wall depicted and the range of patterns in the drum beneath the dome. And the second, earlier, 9th century, is Muhammad al-Khwarizmi from Khwarazm, but was working under the patronage of the Caliph in Cairo. And he laid out dirhams, the coins, silver coins at the time, to establish the problems that became known as algebra. He worked extensively as well with geometry, and geometry was a great inheritance from the Greek scientific corpus, all of which was translated into Arabic and commented upon. All of these geometric patterns are based on the structure of the center and the circumference and the use of a compass. Okay, I'll go through the last section, which is a sequence of showing other ways of using symmetry in Islamic aesthetics beyond that specifically of the Taj Mahal and the Alhambra. But here you see the structure of the geometry on the left, the layout of polygons in contact in the middle using the points of intersection and drawing of lines, and then the construction of the bands that form the geometric patterns as we see them. We find correlation between the use of geometric patterns, symmetry, in architecture and the arts in historical sources of the 10th, 11th, 12th century. Here we see an amazing tympanum of a tomb structure in Maragha in Western Iran, showing 3 intersecting polygonal networks. The clay on the top surface is intersecting dodecagons, 12-sided figures, outlined in turquoise glaze, the very earliest use of turquoise glaze in Islamic architecture, of nonagons, and then beneath it, a little bit less easily visible, a network of double hexagons. So hexagons, nonagons, dodecagons, all intersecting, creating a 3-layered multiple network of polygons. The earliest use of intersecting dodecagrams, 12 pointed stars, all intersecting, each surrounding the name of God, Allah, the essence of his name. Then uses and playfulness of symmetry, we're just going to go through several examples here. The interlacing bands using ebony and ivory in a mimbar from Marrakesh that was made in Cordoba in the 12th century. A ceramic tile panel made of individual pieces of tile that if you look carefully, you can see lines with horizontal axes, but also the intersecting axes of a hexagonal grid, and the use of both cobalt and turquoise glaze combined with white, where you see 6-pointed stars within 6-pointed stars within 6-pointed stars. So incredible playfulness in the use of geometry and symmetry groups. A mihrab from the Metropolitan Museum of Art from 14th century Iran, which for all the world looks symmetrical, but again, the symmetry is broken by the calligraphy, but also by the artist. If we look closely at the spandrels above the arch, I've highlighted the little bits of symmetry breaking that clearly are intentional, not a mistake, different forms of flowers, and the different shapes of the leaves of the arabesque. Another example of the playfulness is the tension created between the use of global symmetry and local symmetry. And here, the binary or the algorithmic or the random use of color in individual patterns, where the shape remains the same and is repeated according to symmetry principles, but the use of color changes, either in this case randomly in the upper right or in a binary fashion. But algorithmic is another possibility where more than 2 colors in sequence are repeated. We haven't touched upon, but again, the subject of an entire course, certainly a full hour's lecture, the use of light and how that may be affecting projected geometry. So in summary, we've covered in all too short a time the 4 basic symmetry operations in Islamic art and architecture, order patterns, field patterns, quasi-periodicity, which we didn't touch upon, a symmetry breaking of 3 different forms of transformation, just incredible playfulness in design and pattern making. And then we've talked about light and projection, ambiguities inherent in patterns and pattern making, global and local symmetries, anti-symmetry, polarities and dualities, and just hinted at the theological dimension as well. Last slide brings us back here to the Hillside Club. And I hope that this has given you insight not only into symmetry and Islamic aesthetics, but also approaches to beauty and aspects of beauty and how this was approached in Islamic art and architecture in many parts of the world and many media, and emphasizing at the end today the need for us each to go out and find beauty in our lives and around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to start with just a couple of questions, and then we'll look at the questions from the audience. I'm hoping people can hear me from here. So I'm just going to start with a question about what was it that grabbed your heart and inspired you to study both Islamic art and geometric patterns within it?
Wow, well, that takes me back a lot of years to when I was a teenager and had an opportunity to live in Turkey and study there as a student. And I think what most attracted me was I was blown away by nothing that I saw was evident of what I had learned, that everything I had learned was not evident in the reality of the lived world. That was my first experience in a majority Muslim country, certainly with many minorities of other religious traditions, but could be called Islamic in terms of major population. So I learned the language, I traveled all over, I went to monuments. I was absolutely floored by the beauty.
Well, and we certainly saw, even just in this brief period, some incredible beauty this evening. You obviously, another whole course could be on textiles, but are these same traditions followed in the textiles, or is that a different form of symmetry?
The symmetry that I discussed and went through all too quickly is the symmetry that underlies all art and all nature. There is no other symmetry than the laws of symmetry. I mentioned very briefly quasi-periodicity, which is a new symmetry discovered in the Western world of science in the late 1970s. Roger Penrose is often credited with the discovery of quasi-periodicity, but 800 years earlier, this form of pattern, which does not have the periodicity of the 17 plane symmetry groups, appeared in Islamic architecture. And so that has been at the forefront of contemporary mathematical studies. And my first presentation of this lecture was given to a mathematical audience in Denver in January.
Fascinating. So unfortunately, none of us are going to get to visit the Taj Mahal or the Alhambra anytime soon. So here in the Bay Area, where could our visitors go to experience some of this beauty and symmetry within this area?
You know, there was such an incredible influence of both Andalusian architecture and Mughal architecture in the development of American monuments. Even if you go up to Euclid and Hearst, above Vic's coffee shop, there is an interlace molding around the architecture that is derivative, I think, of Andalusian interlace. And in San Francisco, there's the old Alhambra Theater. And if you scratch the surface and look, you actually find that there are lots and lots of influences in American art and architecture.
We're getting people wishing that you could give an entire class on this topic, of course. We'll end with one final question, and it's about the relationship of symmetry in music, as well as in these other art forms that you've already addressed. Does it extend, in your knowledge, in the Islamic art, extend into music?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Symmetry of sound is exactly music. And Bach, in his fugues, and I think Paul Hindemith both composed music that was not only symmetrical in sound, but also symmetrical on the page. So as there's an ascent, there's a descent, and the entire play is both visual and oral. The other aspect that I'd like to mention is symmetry breaking, and how important that is, for example, in viruses. Viruses, coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2, the virus that leads to the disease COVID-19, looks like an amazing spherical symmetry, but it functions with symmetry breaking. And that's what makes viruses so strong. That's what makes music so beautiful. And that's what makes ornament in architecture so magnificent. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Carol. I'm going to move in here just to thank our audience for their patience as we all learn to adapt in this new world. But it's a real pleasure to appreciate beauty and symmetry, something that the arts and crafts movement also very much appreciated. So thank you for joining us here at the Hillside Club. Please join us again July 6th, when we'll be talking about, again, a topic on the pandemic, plastics and the pandemic. We appreciate your patience. We are so glad you joined us, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime soon, in person and online. Good night.